The crystalline light of the orbital council dome filtered through the semi-transparent walls of Ambassador Zixtal's office, scattering soft aquamarine hues across his sleek desk. The air inside was perfectly regulated, precisely 18.3 degrees Celsius, with trace aromatics tuned to Valerian olfactory preferences. It was a sanctuary of calm and reason, until the black-marked data cube landed on his desk with a thud that echoed like a war drum. Zixtal's gill pads flexed once in quiet irritation. The cube bore a crimson Sigil Class 10 priority, a level so rarely invoked that even he, with 3 decades in xenanthropology, had only seen it twice before. He activated the cube with a cautious brush of his tri-jointed fingers. A holographic interface blinked into life, accompanied by a low, harmonic hum meant to suppress neural stress. Subject: Homo sapiens Terran ground combat forces, the file read. His mandibles clicked once in mild distaste. Humans again. He adjusted his breathing apparatus, tiny vents along his jawline regulating the oxygen mix. The Council had debated Earth's admission into galactic society for over 2 standard cycles. In that time, humanity had gone from obscure death world dwellers to a growing enigma-expanding influence far beyond their technological standing. Zixtal didn't trust them, but neither did he fear them. Until now, with a flick of his claw, he began the playback of the first embedded file. The projected scene bloomed into view above his desk-grainy combat footage from the Centauri dust war. A desolate, wind-blasted hellscape filled the projection. Sulfuric storms rolled across. The horizon, acid rain slicing through exposed metal and flesh. Alien forces Valkyrene and Dravanti troops scrambled for cover, their armor corroding in real time. And then the humans entered. Zixtal leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The Terran infantry, marked with simple identifiers, Unit 7B, moved calmly through the storm as if walking through a mild drizzle. Their visors glowed blue through acidic haze. No hesitation, no confusion, no fear. Their formation didn't falter, even when one soldier's leg was struck by a corrosive burst. The human collapsed, sprayed on a patch, slapped it onto exposed muscle, and resumed formation in seconds. "This is standard infantry?" Zixtal muttered aloud. His aide, Liren, hovered nearby, uncertain whether to speak. The footage continued. Humans advanced under fire, returning precise bursts of kinetic slugs that ruptured enemy armor. No wasted motion. Every step purposeful, all while the environment itself would have liquefied half the Council's member species in moments. Zixtal paused the feed. His chest slowly rose and fell beneath his tunic. The silence in the room was unnerving. "These aren't enhanced? No exoneural overlays or cybernetic augments?" he asked. Liren swallowed audibly. "Baseline soldiers, sir. No modifications." Zixtal's secondary pupils dilated slightly, in involuntary stress response. He resumed the file. More footage. A mountain pass under bombardment. A human squad advances with synchronized breath, their boots cracking across frozen sulfur crust. One casually comments about missing taco night back home. Another jokes about the smell. Moments later, they breach a bunker, neutralize 2 fortified Dravanti with blinding speed, and proceed to the next objective without pause. Zixtal closed his eyes briefly. "If this is what they call regular," he whispered to himself, "then what do they call monsters?" He didn't expect an answer. But somewhere deep in the file, beneath a tab marked Redacted Special Operations, he suspected he would find it. And he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Zixtal had not moved from his desk, and 3 cycles. His eyes wide, tired, glimmering with pale stress remained, locked on the shifting data cascading across his bioscreen. The further he read, the less. He understood. Not because the information was unclear, on the contrary. It was methodically presented, beautifully annotated, and terrifying in its simplicity. Humanity, it seemed, did not merely fight wars. They became war when called upon. He scrolled deeper into the report, transitioning past battlefield engagements and into a section labeled Cultural Infrastructure and Mobilization Protocols. A chilling title. But it proved far more disturbing than he could have imagined. The builders of war, Zixtal whispered aloud, voice dry as dust. The next holosequence unfolded like a slow-building nightmare. Earth-rich, blue, and full of natural beauty showed cities erupting into ordered chaos during a declared planetary emergency. There were no riots, no panics. Instead, conversion. Civilian manufacturing plants pivoted their assembly lines in less than 20 hours. Cargo shuttles became troop carriers. Communication satellites rerouted to military frequencies. Millions of humans who had never held a weapon were suddenly part of the machine. Observe this, sir, Liren said nervously, gesturing at a subsection. Marked civilian reassignment and national emergency status. The screen shifted again. A schoolteacher smiling, middle-aged, cheerful now, stood in front of a massive logistics board, coordinating the transport of medical equipment and weaponry. A teenager, barely into adulthood, was seen assembling drone kits under the guidance of a retired engineer. A former athlete operated a railgun emplacement after 2 weeks of fast-track training. Zixtal felt his throat constrict. They don't collapse under pressure. They crystallize. He remembered the Tolvani crisis. When his own homeworld was threatened by pirates, the planetary government had spent 3 weeks debating evacuation routes. By then, 10,000 were dead. But here, humans adapted like their survival instinct wasn't just biological. It was cultural. The next section hit harder. Physical and psychological tolerances of baseline human infantry. He expected the usual metrics. Instead, he found defiance of logic. Sleep cycles reduced to 4 hours during active duty. Weeks without proper rest. Caloric consumption converted into a sludge-like paste with absurd nutrient density, enough to power a human for days. Endurance trials that had them submerged in ice, buried alive in mud, or marching across irradiated terrain. And worse still, they volunteered for it. They do this to themselves? Zixtal asked, almost offended. Liren nodded quietly. It's part of their recruitment. They call it selection. Selection for what? The answer came too quickly. For being worthy of the uniform. The ambassador turned sharply, his pupils tightening into slits. Worthy? As if surviving torture and starvation is a rite of passage? Yes, Liren said simply. It's not punishment. It's preparation. Zixtal turned back to the file, his claws clenching. Every logical framework he knew was buckling. His species trained warriors to protect. The humans trained theirs to endure, adapt, and break. And they did so with frightening calm. In the corner of the report, he noticed a curious chart education system, overlap with tactical preconditioning. He opened it. What he saw chilled him. Deeper than any battlefield footage. From a young age, very young humans were conditioned for adversity, not overtly, not through drills or commands, but subtly, through team sports, through physical education, through competition and loss. Children were taught to fail, to push, to recover, to protect others. Earth schools weren't just knowledge factories. They were the first crucible. It was elegant and horrifying. They raised their young for war, Zixtal murmured, and no one even notices. He sat back in his chair, the cold realization blooming in his chest like a growing frost. This wasn't just about technology. It wasn't about numbers or resources. Humanity had engineered its entire society, from childhood games to wartime industries, as a fluid war engine. And all this still belonged to the regulars. A new file blinked in the corner of the screen, labeled Special Forces, Tier Z. Classification: restricted. Zixtal stared at it, breathing shallowly. What could possibly be beyond this? The chamber lights dimmed as Zixtal leaned back, antennae twitching with unease. His fingers hesitated over the next segment. He'd seen the data-endless combat footage, resilience beyond reason, children raised in quiet preparation for war. But what disturbed him now was not how humans fought. It was why the file loaded slowly, labeled in stark council script, Section 4, Motivational Psychology, Human Combat Behavior, and Ideological Drivers. Zixtal expected the usual: resources, control, survival, the same variables that drove war across the stars for millennia. But the screen bloomed open with concepts that made no sense to his trained xenological mind: honor, revenge, freedom, hope. He blinked twice, assuming it was a translation failure. But the meaning held. He read the summary again. Humans, it stated, often entered combat with no promise of gain. They willingly risked death for ideals, abstract ideals, beliefs, dreams, emotions that had no direct reward, no guaranteed result, only meaning. Liren stood quietly beside him, hands trembling just enough to betray his inner turmoil. Zixtal spoke without looking up. They fight not because they must, but because they believe. Yes, sir, Liren replied. That's what frightens the analysis teams most. Their wars aren't always logical. They're personal. Zixtal studied one particular report: a soldier named Jenna Vale, who ran into enemy fire to rescue wounded strangers from another species. When questioned later, she said, "No one gets left behind. Not on my watch. Not a sibling. Not a lover. Not a child. Just someone." And she'd nearly died to save them. Even the youngest of their soldiers, Zixtal muttered, would die for someone they've never met. Another video played this time, a combat medic, pinned under debris, calmly instructing his squadmate on how to amputate his leg so they could escape the blast zone. The medic's face was pale but focused. He smiled at the end and said, "Tell my wife I kept my promise." The breath caught in Zixtal's throat. "I don't understand this," he said, barely above a whisper. "These aren't survival instincts. These are rituals. They call it sacrifice." Liren murmured "Z-I, X tall single quotes, S eyes narrowed. "Do other species do this?" he asked. Liren slowly shook his head. "Not like this. Most civilizations avoid loss. Humans embrace it. They turn it into purpose." More profiles scrolled by. A squad that held a line for 49 hours so a refugee convoy could escape. A pilot who crashed his own ship into an enemy. Dreadnought, smiling as he whispered, "For the kids in Sector 12. And the thousands of nameless faces who fell without medals, who volunteered to walk into minefields, radiation zones, alien nests, just so someone else wouldn't have. To Zixtal's mandibles trembled. "This is why we lose to them," he said finally. "Because we can't calculate this." "We tried," Liren added quietly. "No model works. They fight like animals, but with the hearts of poets." A heavy silence fell between them. The last line of the section blinked on screen in stark. Alien characters. Human conflict patterns are unpredictable due to non-tangible motivational vectors. Strategic modeling is unreliable. Avoid moral provocation. Zixtal rose slowly, walking to the viewport where Earth hung suspended in space, glowing and calm. That tranquil blue sphere had birthed a species that turned grief into power, fear into discipline, and love into weapons. He stood there for several long minutes, feeling a cold unease stir beneath his skin. If these were the beliefs that guided their regular soldiers, then what kind of faith must drive the ones they call special? The report had grown cold. Not in data, it was still more, far more, but in tone. Each page was clinical, sanitized, detached. But Zixtal felt it like a deepening shadow, something lurking beneath the numbers, something that did not want to be found. The tab pulsed. Faintly on the corner of the screen, Tier Z redaction, Special Forces, eyes only. He hadn't opened it yet. Zixtal's fingers hovered near the unlock rune. His instincts, finely honed across decades of cultural diplomacy, urged him to walk away. Everything up to this point had been devastating enough. The training, the motivation, the resilience. And still, humanity had set a boundary beyond all of it. A line they dared not cross casually. Behind him, Liren shifted with unease, his voice barely audible. "Sir, there are council protocols against viewing Tier Z material alone." Zixtal didn't answer. His mind spun through everything he'd read. The battlefield tapes, the children trained to lose, the volunteers who died for ideas no one could touch. And through it all, one thought repeated in his mind like a broken echo. If this is regular, what lies beyond it? He touched the rune. The screen went dark. For 5 full seconds, nothing happened. Then a single image appeared. Not a battlefield. Not a soldier. Just a patch of simple black emblem with no name, no rank, no insignia. Only a pair of angular white eyes staring from a shadowed helmet. Beneath it, a word. Ghost. Zixtal blinked. The screen expanded. Paragraphs loaded slowly, as if the system itself hesitated to expose what came next. The report began without preamble. Special Forces units are not enhancements of standard Terran military. They are an entirely different psychological species. A chill ran through Zixtal's limbs. Selected from the most adaptable, resilient, and mentally fortified of human infantry, these individuals are subjected to a further multi-year selection process. Most fail. Many break. Those who remain are hollowed rebuilt not to survive war, but to become it. Images flickered across the screen now, faster unlabeled footage. Grainy, unstable, sometimes recorded from enemy feeds before the source was abruptly silenced. A council base on Talvern 5 collapsing within 6 minutes. A planetary governor screaming over radio frequencies before static swallowed the transmission. An empire's royal family found poisoned, their guards still standing. No witnesses, no evidence. Did they fight a battle? Liren whispered. Zixtal shook his head. No, they removed it. The report continued. These operatives function alone or in units of 2 to 6. No support, no recovery, no extraction plan. They operate with total autonomy. They are trained to view themselves as expendable tools of mission success, not individuals. The words struck harder than explosions. They do not fear death. They fear mission failure. Zixtal's pulse spiked. He read on. Simulations of planetary destabilization. Espionage so complete that entire civilizations toppled without ever realizing they were under attack. These warriors did not engage armies. They unmade governments, turned alliances, removed ideologies. They're not soldiers, Zixtal said. Aloud, their weapons with loyalty. Liren's face was pale. Why does the council not speak of them? Zixtal looked up slowly. Because you don't talk about monsters that walk beneath your bed. You pray you never wake them. And still, what haunted him most wasn't the cold efficiency. It was that word again. Special. Humanity hadn't given them numbers. No classifications. No proud names. Just one word. Special. Not to glorify, but to warn. Because even humans needed something to separate these from their already fearsome. Armies. A linguistic wall. A mental red flag. Zixtal stared at the final line on the screen. In the event of confirmed Special Forces deployment, Immediate tactical withdrawal is advised. Engage only with orbital-level weapons or extinction-class response. Do not negotiate. Do not pursue. Surviving contact is rare. Understanding them is impossible. The screen flickered and dimmed. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Zixtal said quietly, "They leave in our blind spots, not as ghosts, but as reminders that if you ever see one, it's already too late." And somewhere, behind the sealed doors of human command centers, those ghosts were watching too. The report had grown cold. Not in data, there was still more, far more, but in tone. Each page was clinical, sanitized, detached. But Zixtal felt it like a deepening shadow, something lurking beneath the numbers. Something that did not want to be found. The tab pulsed faintly on the corner of the screen. Tier Z redaction. Special Forces. Eyes only. He hadn't opened it yet. Zixtal's fingers hovered near the unlock room. His instincts, finely honed across decades of cultural diplomacy, urged him to walk away. Everything up to this point had been devastating enough. The training, the motivation, the resilience. And still, humanity had set a boundary beyond all of it. A line they dared not cross casually. Behind him, Liren shifted with unease, his voice barely audible. "Sir, there are council protocols against viewing Tier Z material alone." Zixtal didn't answer. His mind spun through everything he'd read. The battlefield tapes, the children trained to lose, the volunteers who died for ideas no one could touch. And through it all, one thought repeated in his mind like a broken echo. If this is regular, what lies beyond it? He touched the room. The screen went dark. For 5 full seconds, nothing happened. Then a single image appeared. Not a battlefield, not a soldier. Just a patch of simple black emblem with no name, no rank, no insignia. Only a pair of angular white eyes staring from a shadowed helmet. Beneath it, a word. Ghost. Zixtal blinked. The screen expanded. Paragraphs loaded slowly, as if the system itself hesitated to expose what came next. The report began without preamble. Special Forces units are not enhancements of standard Terran military. They are an entirely different psychological species. A chill ran through Zixtal's limbs. Selected from the most adaptable, resilient, and mentally fortified of human infantry, these individuals are subjected to a further multi-year selection process. Most fail. Many break. Those who remain are hollowed, rebuilt, not to survive war, but to become it. Images flickered across the screen now. Faster unlabeled footage. Grainy, unstable, sometimes recorded from enemy feeds before the source was abruptly silenced. A council base on Talviren 5 collapsing within 6 minutes. A planetary governor screaming over radio frequencies before static swallowed the transmission. An empire's royal family found poisoned, their guards still standing. No witnesses, no evidence. Did they fight a battle? Liren whispered. Zixtal shook his head. No, they removed it. The report continued. These operatives function alone or in units of 2 to 6. No support, no recovery, no extraction plan. They operate with total autonomy. They are trained to view themselves as expendable tools of mission success, not individuals. The words struck harder than explosions. They do not fear death. They fear mission failure. Zixtal's pulse spiked. He read on. Simulations of planetary destabilization. Espionage so complete that entire civilizations toppled without ever realizing they were under attack. These warriors did not engage armies. They unmade governments, turned alliances, removed ideologies. They're not soldiers, Zixtal said aloud. They're weapons with loyalty. Liren's face was pale. Why does the council not speak of them? Zixtal looked up slowly. Because you don't talk about monsters that walk beneath your bed. You pray you never wake them. And still, what haunted him most wasn't the cold efficiency. It was that word again. Special. Humanity hadn't given them numbers. No classifications. No proud names. Just one word. Special. Not to glorify, but to warn. Because even humans needed something to separate these from their already fearsome armies. A linguistic wall. A mental red flag. Zixtal stared at the final line on the screen. In the event of confirmed Special Forces deployment, immediate. Tactical withdrawal is advised. Engage only with orbital-level weapons or extinction-class response. Do not negotiate. Do not pursue. Surviving contact is rare. Understanding them is impossible. The screen flickered and dimmed. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Zixtal said quietly, "They live in our blind spots. Not as ghosts ... but as reminders. And if you ever see one, it's already too late." And somewhere, behind the sealed doors of human command centers, those ghosts were watching too. Zixtal didn't sleep that cycle. He tried. He closed his eyes, let the filtration hum of the council dome wash over his mind like a calming tide. But behind the silence lived the ghost. That emblem, those eyes. The absence of sound where a battle should have raged. By the second hour of sleeplessness, he summoned more data. Unofficial reports, debriefings, psychological profiles. He didn't want sanitized summaries anymore. He wanted the truth-raw, unfiltered human. He got it. One file stood out. A psychological intake form for a candidate known only as subject. 42K coding name. Ember. The text was faded, portions redacted, but fragments remained. Subject displays complete tolerance to sleep deprivation, sustained for 18 days. No hallucinations reported. Emotional regulation consistent under extended. Duress, including stress simulations involving betrayal, isolation, and execution of teammates. Zixtal felt the pit of his chest go hollow. Execution of teammates? He blinked and continued reading. When asked to prioritize between saving a wounded squadmate or completing mission parameters, subject selected mission with no hesitation. Upon review of choice, showed no regret. Lirin hovered behind him again, watching. "This isn't training," Zixtal murmured. "This is transformation." The next section was labeled Phase Omega Conditioning, and this was where it turned from cruel to inhuman. They were forced to survive months in darkness, married and sealed, silent chambers underground, no communication, no movement, only their own minds. They fought in full sensory deprivation simulations for weeks. They were injected with compounds to simulate the full pain spectrum burns. Evisceration, blunt trauma without damage, only sensation. And they endured. The weak tapped out. Some went mad, the rest, they came back calm. Final candidates exhibit reduction in measurable fear response. No signs of trauma when confronted with simulated death. Identity dissociation confirmed. Subject self-identifies as mission vector, not individual. Zixtal couldn't read anymore. He stood abruptly, walked to the viewport again, and stared into the stars. Earth glowed as it always had, beautiful. Peaceful, but he could see it differently now. He could see the factories of monsters beneath that atmosphere. "They broke them," he whispered. "No," Lirin said gently. "They forged them." Zixtal turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "They're not mad, sir. Not unstable. They're refined. These aren't rage-driven killers. They don't act from hatred. They act from clarity, precision, discipline so pure it no longer looks human." Zixtal was silent. Lirin swallowed hard, then added, "They are humanity's scalpel, not their hammer." And it was true. These weren't berserkers. These weren't the screaming hordes of ancient wars. These were shadows, instruments, purpose. Incarnate, Zixtal sat again, trembling now. He'd always believed that even the most violent species retained some instinct of preservation, that somewhere, in the dark, all creatures feared death. But the humans had sculpted individuals who did not. Individuals who walked alone into enemy territory, accepted annihilation as certainty, and still smiled. The final part of Ember's report sealed the truth into Zixtal's bones. Subject final test. Infiltrated live hostile scenario with no backup. Mission success. Extraction refused. Subject remained embedded for 91 days beyond orders to complete secondary objective unassigned. When asked why, subject responded, "Because it needed doing." He read the line again, then again. And the worst part wasn't what Ember had done. It was how familiar the words sounded. As if this wasn't unique. As if this wasn't extraordinary. As if, among the ghosts, Ember was just another face in the dark. Another tool sharpened to a deadly edge. Another reminder of what humanity had learned to create. Not just warriors, but willing ghost souls who had stepped beyond fear, beyond identity, beyond even self, and walked there in silence until the mission was done. The storm outside the orbital dome had grown violent. A magnetic pulse from the binary stars lit the edges of Zixtal's office in brief flashes of white gold, throwing long shadows across the floor. But it wasn't the weather that unsettled Thea. Ambassador Dot, it was a single word dot special dot. He had studied the humans' culture for years, read their broadcasts, listened to their songs, even attended their theatrical performances through neural translation. He had words for everything. They layered their meanings, buried messages beneath tone, sarcasm, irony. But the word special was different. Dot, it wasn't meant to elevate. It wasn't a title of glory, Dot. It was a separation. A warning. Zixtal pulled up the linguistic files dictionaries, military documentation, transcripts from human briefings. The word appeared thousands of times. Special forces, special operations, special tactics, always spoken with a certain ... reservation, sometimes reverence, often fear, and never, ever used lightly. He watched a clip from a human general briefing his troops. The man's voice was gravel, his eyes sharp as flint. "If you see one of ours wearing black with no insignia, walk away. That's not a soldier. Anymore, that's a directive with skin on it." Zixtal felt his throat tighten. A directive, not a person. He opened another file, internal human psychological models. The section was marked semantic separation and combat conditioning. Use of the word special in military doctrine serves dual purpose. Internally, it creates psychological distance between conventional forces and black-tier operatives. Externally, it serves as a veiled deterrent to enemy forces. A social firewall. A social firewall. A shield of language. Even the humans were afraid of what they had created. He turned to Liren, who sat silently on the edge of a hovering stool, face pale and motionless. "Why call them that at all?" Zixtal asked. "Why not? Give them a number? A code? Why call them anything?" Liren hesitated. Then, in a rare moment of clarity, he said, "Because humans need to name their fears." Zixtal blinked. "What? They're not like us," Liren continued. "They don't ignore what terrifies them. They shape it, define it. Then they send it into battle." The words hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Zixtal returned to the reports. Mission logs, testimonies. Some of the records had been input by humans themselves, commanders, who had worked with special units and never fully recovered. One wrote, "They follow orders without ego, kill without celebration, vanish without recognition." I asked one what he wanted after retirement. He said, "Nothing. I stopped being someone years ago." Another, I watched a ghost amputate his own arm to escape a crash site. He fashioned a pressure cuff out of wire, killed 4 hostiles with his teeth, and retrieved the package. When I said thank you, he just said, it was expected. Zixtal's claws trembled. This wasn't a species that glorified war. This was a species that dreaded what they were capable of, and gave their worst to protect the rest. The final psychological summary echoed, like a thunderclap through the chamber. Special Forces designation is a self-imposed limitation, a term designed not to celebrate strength, but to isolate it. It reminds humans and their enemies that these operatives do not operate within the rules of war. They are not governed by preservation, mercy, or recognition, only by the mission, only by necessity. Zixtal closed his eyes. So that was it. The humans called them special, not to honor them, but to warn themselves. A barrier of language, a whispered boundary, a last line of sanity, because if you ever had to use them, things had already gone too far. And if you ever met them, then the war was already lost. Zixtal stood alone at the edge of his office viewport. The stars looked the same as they always had, distant, peaceful, eternal. But now, the space between them felt smaller, tighter, as if some invisible pressure had folded reality inward. Earth floated silently in the distance, a pale blue jewel, turning slowly in the dark. It looked harmless, soft, like a nursery world, for gentle beings who sang to the ocean and danced in the rain. But Zixtal no longer saw it that way. He saw the truth now, a planet that raised its children for struggle, a civilization that shaped its grief into steel, a people who taught their youth how to lose so they would learn how to stand again. And in the shadows of that world walked the ones they called special. Not soldiers, not heroes. Warnings. Behind him, the holoscreen still pulsed faintly with a final line of the report. In the event of contact with Special Forces personnel, all negotiation channels are to be abandoned. Immediate orbital evacuation is advised. Tactical nuclear response is considered acceptable. Zixtal had seen many threats in his time. Pirate lords, imperial warlords, predatory species that saw other sapiens as prey. But none of them had ever frightened him like this, because those enemies wanted something. Humans? They fought for ideas, for beliefs, for ghosts in their own history, and their worst killers didn't want medals or monuments or revenge. They only wanted completion. Zixtal whispered to himself, barely aware of the words escaping his mandibles. If regular human soldiers are terrifying, then those they call special are the things we pray never come looking. Liren stood a few paces behind him, no longer speaking. He looked as if he too had aged in a single day. A quiet chime broke the silence. A message. A new report. Zixtal didn't move. He didn't want to know. But the file opened automatically. Priority override stamped in gold. Galactic border incident. Vraxis Outpost 7. He read slowly. And with each word, his stomach hollowed further. One human shuttle. No weapons. Detected on long-range scans. No broadcasts. No beacons. No demands. But within 17 minutes of atmospheric entry, the Vraxis defensive grid went offline. Then the communications hub. Then the chain of command. And at the end, a line recorded by the only surviving sentry. I didn't even see their faces. Just shadows, then silence. The council had not responded yet. They were still deliberating, still debating language and treaties, and whether the incident could be contained diplomatically. Zixtal closed the report. He stared at Earth one last time. Now, he understood why humans gave their monsters gentle names, not to soften them, not to hide them, but as an act of mercy. To remind the galaxy and themselves that those operatives were not born from glory or bloodlust, but from necessity. from a place so dark that even the humans feared to speak it aloud. The word special was a boundary dot. It said, "Here is where war ends and something else begins. A final barrier of language. A last whispered prayer dot, and if you are ever unlucky enough to hear that word spoken in a human briefing, you are no longer part of a war. You are inside a reckoning." Zixtal turned away from the window, his voice brittle as he gave his final order to Liren. "Notify the council." He paused. "Tell them. We need to reconsider Earth's classification." "Reclassify it as what, sir?" Liren asked softly. Zixtal didn't look back. He simply said, "Haunted," and walked away as the blue planet kept turning, silently birthing its ghosts.